My name is Kevin Tanner. I'm a university student currently working at a personal Italian restaurant. I remember when I came for the interview, I was told, it's rare for someone young to come to a restaurant frequented by the elderly. Indeed, it seemed like many were choosing places like bars, cafes, or chic restaurants that serve stylish lunches, seeking new encounters or a sparkling experience, now that they could finally work part-time without being constantly monitored by teachers. Especially, pubs that allow work until late and offer good wages were popular jobs among university students. However, I absolutely detested the idea of working somewhere that required constant bustling about. It wasn't that I didn't want to move my body. It was because I had heard from the upperclassmen that even the nicest people could turn scary during work, which scared me. I have no immunity to being scolded. Of course, I do get scolded at my current job, but it's never in an unreasonable, loud manner. They gently tell me how to improve next time, so I was indeed looking for a calm workplace where I wouldn't be rushed, with kind people. I quite like the times when there are no customers, and I can idly watch the baseball night games on TV while doing the dishes. This restaurant isn't always this peaceful, and it does get quite busy around lunch and evening. During those times, I have to hurry to take orders, serve, handle the cash register, and watch dishes in between. However, as the only part-time worker aside from the owner, the small restaurant could somehow manage, so I felt I made the right choice being here. Here, today's meal for you. You always choose this, huh? You could order something fancy once in a while. We don't mind at all, considering how hard you work. The proprietress always brings me my usual spaghetti and meatballs with those words. This restaurant's dishes are all delicious, but especially these meatballs are exquisite. Not just plain meat, but mixed with onions and original spices. They are my favorite. I wonder why something as simple as meatballs can taste so good, a dish that's also popular among the customers. Despite there being more seemingly nutritious options, this spaghetti and meatballs is the restaurant's signature dish. This is my favorite menu item. I know other dishes might be more nutritious, but the meatballs from this restaurant is really delicious. Please teach me how to make it sometime. Whenever I say that, the restaurant owner, the old man, laughs it off, saying it's a corporate secret. Man, it was busy today. Thinking this, I carefully clean the restaurant until there's not a speck of dust, making sure it's sparkling clean. Then, I check for any items left behind by customers, and finally straighten the magazines on the bookshelf. Alright, the restaurant's in good shape now. Saying that, I quickly do a final check. After finishing the last of the dishes and saying goodbye to the owners, I head out. On my way home, the air felt somewhat warm, but a strong wind was blowing. I recalled the weather forecast mentioning a hurricane coming tonight. The wind was so strong it was hard to walk. I need to get home before it gets worse. Thinking this, I struggled against the wind and passed by a small park that usually had no visitors and lacked playground equipment. With only 2 streetlights, the park was considered dangerous by neighborhood mothers, telling their children not to play there because of its gloomy atmosphere. It was nearly 7 p.m. Usually deserted by dusk, I saw 2 small figures under the streetlight of the park that day. If it were an adult, I would have just passed by, but these figures were clearly small. Approaching slowly, I realized they were 2 boys, about elementary school age. Even though the hurricane was coming, it wasn't summer yet, and the nights were still chilly. Why would 2 boys be out here at this time? Clearly, something was off. I couldn't just leave 2 young children alone like this, so I cautiously approached them. On closer inspection, they were dressed in short sleeves and shorts, completely unsuitable for the season, huddling together and shivering. Their clothes were tattered, with holes and fraying threads, and they were clearly unwashed. Seeing them shivering in the cold, dressed in filthy clothes, I knew I had to take them somewhere warm, so I called out from a distance, trying not to scare them too much. "Hey, guys, aren't you going home?" As I spoke, their expressions instantly tensed up. Perhaps, if I were a woman, their reaction might have been different. But understandably, being approached suddenly by an adult man can be frightening. But I couldn't just leave them there. The 2 boys were shockingly thin, and it struck me how in a country like modern America, there could be children suffering from such hunger. I kept talking to them without getting too close, so they wouldn't run away, still frightened. This park is dark and full of hiding spots, so it's very dangerous. Plus, with the hurricane coming tonight, it'll be even more hazardous. And it's already cold now, but it will get colder. It's dangerous, so why don't you come to the Italian restaurant where I work? Do you know the Italian restaurant nearby? When I asked, the older boy replied, I've passed by it with my mom. Though they answered my question, it was clear they were still wary. I called the restaurant and explained the situation to the owner, asking if he could come to pick us up. When the proprietress heard we were at that park, she said it was serious and that she'd come right away. A few minutes later, the proprietress arrived, saying, Kevin, sorry to keep you waiting. So, the kids you mentioned are, and then stopped mid-sentence upon seeing the two boys under the streetlight. She approached slowly, crouched in front of them, and said, We won't do anything scary, let's go somewhere warm, in a gentle voice. The boys, seemingly reassured by her tone, hesitantly took her hand. The wind had picked up even more by then. She draped her large shawl over the two boys, saying, Let's hurry, and gently pushed their backs. On the way, I learned their names were Nick Madison and Sean Madison. Though they were 2 years apart, they were about the same height and weight. Probably, the older boy had been sharing his food with his younger brother. Seeing the even more emaciated limbs of Nick made my heart ache. Taking them home by myself would likely lead to trouble, being seen as suspicious. I was grateful to have someone to rely on during such times as we headed to my apartment with the boys and the proprietress. Thanks to her help, I was able to take them in. The proprietress decided to stay for a while in the room until the boys felt safe. I got out some of the warmest clothes I could find from my dresser and handed them to the boys. They were obviously too big and might not be very warm, but they had to be better than the thin shirts they were wearing. Confused, but grateful, they thanked me and timidly put on the oversized clothes. Thinking they must be freezing, I said, I'll run the bath. Warm yourselves up. And while you're at it, get cleaned up. They hesitated, furrowing their brows and saying, We can't impose that much. But the proprietress insisted, Don't be shy, little ones. You're so cold. You'll catch a cold if you stay like this. We're really worried about you. Please, warm up properly. They eventually agreed to her request. While they bathed, I turned up the heater to warm the room quickly, and I set up the hairdryer I had never used, a gift from my sister, in the changing area. Make sure to style your hair now that you're in college, she had said. I was glad to finally have a use for it. After preparing for their post-bath needs, I started chopping onions on the cutting board. When they came out of the bath in my oversized underwear, held up with rubber bands to fit, I handed them towels to dry their hair and told them, The hairdryer's over there. Use it. They nodded silently. While they dried their hair, I tossed pasta noodles into the pot. The proprietress gently urged them, Come on, dry your hair. They obediently followed. As I had somewhat expected, the two of them didn't know how to use a hairdryer. I wondered what kind of life they had led up to this point. I also made some spaghetti sauce, filling the room with its aroma. Their eyes lit up. How long had it been since they had a proper meal? At first, they looked at me, asking, Is this okay? But when I encouraged them with a smile, Yeah, you must be cold and hungry, right? Go on, eat your fill. They eagerly started devouring the spaghetti. The proprietress watched them eat, like a mother watching her sons, with a gentle gaze. I wish I had brought some tasty snacks. If only I had known, she lamented. I hastily rummaged through the cupboard and found some biscuits that my mom had sent in a care package. Though I didn't have much money, and my cupboard was almost empty, these biscuits seemed like a treasure at that moment. I transferred them onto a large plate. Given how quickly they finished their spaghetti, they must have been really hungry. When I placed a plate of biscuits in front of them, they asked again, Is this okay? After I nodded, their eyes sparkled as they eagerly grabbed the biscuits and started munching away. The proprietress couldn't help but laugh at their eagerness. I was amazed by their appetite, having never been one to eat much myself. Seeing Sean suddenly turn red and struggle as if he had choked on his reed bites, I quickly handed him water, saying, Take it easy, don't rush. After gulping down the water, Sean and Nick resumed eating the biscuits as if competing with each other. This made me wonder about their parents. Reluctantly, I asked, So, What about your parents? Where are they now? Their faces turned sad instantly, and they stopped eating their biscuits. Seeing that, I realized they must have been through a lot and didn't want to talk about their home life, so I decided not to press further. Ideally, I should report these children who are this hungry to child services right away, but it's unclear if they would want that. If they wanted to leave their home and live properly, they would have honestly reached out for help by now. With that thought, I decided not to pry for the time being. The proprietress seemed to feel the same, watching them with a silent, tender gaze. I thought I saw a hint of sadness, or maybe regret, in her eyes, but maybe it was my imagination. After a while of silence, I offered, sorry. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. It's late now. Do you want to stay over tonight? When they said they wanted to go home, we decided to walk them to their house nearby. Fortunately, our area wasn't hit by a hurricane hard enough to prevent us from going outside. So, despite the coming storm, it was still possible to walk outside with an adult. While making small talk and walking in their oversized clothes, which made it hard for them to walk, we reached an old apartment a bit away from the residential area. This is our place. Thank you, sir and madam, for today. We won't forget this kindness, they said, before running towards their home. Hey, if you're hungry again, just come by. I started to say but then stopped myself. If their parents heard, it might upset them. Maybe the boys would even get scolded. That's why I hesitated. Those kids, they don't seem to be treated well at home. But sending them back like this, are they really going to be okay? The proprietress murmured as we watched them run off. I shared her concern. To think that on such a night, the two of them were out there alone. It was clear they needed protection, being left outside at night like that. But it didn't necessarily mean they were kicked out. Maybe they had no food at home and ended up wandering to that spot out of desperation. I hope they remember they can always come back to that place if they're in trouble again. I'd hate for them to go through the same hardships. I hope they would come back if they needed help again. Wishing deeply for that, I returned with the proprietress along the path we came. Time passed, and though there were more cold and windy days, the brothers never showed up again. While living my usual life, I constantly worried about whether they had a warm place to stay, if they were able to bathe properly, or if they were still starving. The proprietress seemed to feel the same, occasionally asking if I had seen the boys since that day when I came to work. Every time I work here, the restaurant generously shared any leftover servings of pasta noodles with me. Thanks to the leftovers from the restaurant, I always had plenty of pasta noodles at home. Though money was tight, I could at least buy spaghetti sauce to go with it. I hoped they would return to that park if they needed help. With that wish, I kept checking the park in their neighborhood after work or school, but I never found them. My university life passed without any sign of them. Without pursuing job hunting, I became an apprentice at the Italian restaurant, continuing to dedicate myself to making pasta. While working for a modest wage, I learned everything from noodle preparation to sauce making from the restaurant owner. During my time in university, I couldn't fit in with my classmates or join any clubs. I was also tired of going to the same places all the time. But going to my part-time job felt different. The work wasn't easy, but when I was allowed to do simple cooking, I was deeply moved by the beauty and deliciousness of the owner's pasta noodles. Initially, I chose this job because the owners seemed kind, but gradually, running an Italian restaurant became my dream. Of course, the apprenticeship was far more demanding than my part-time job had ever been. I abandoned my naive university mindset and embraced a strong belief that I would fulfill my dream, no matter how tough the training got, and never gave up. I observed the restaurant owner's techniques closely, desperate to master the art of making delicious pasta. Perhaps due to my efforts, I was finally able to make pasta that received the restaurant owner's approval in my 7th year of training. You've followed through without giving up. Now that you can produce this flavor, you're ready. It's time for you to stand on your own. Congratulations. I'm rooting for you. Hearing this, I was ready to start my own restaurant. 6 years later, when my restaurant first opened, it received harsh criticism online. The owner supposedly trained at a well-loved local establishment, but honestly, I doubted it given the quality, the texture, taste, and firmness of the noodles were all different from that restaurant. I won't be going back, and it can't compare to the restaurant where he trained. It's bad, and all aspects of this second-rate restaurant are inferior. I wish it wouldn't associate itself with that place. Likewise, customer traffic didn't increase as hoped, mirroring those reviews. However, I took those opinions seriously and made continuous improvements to the broth, ingredients, and noodle-making process. I was determined to overturn those negative reviews. I would make my pasta acknowledged as delicious. Despite the criticism, I had no time to be discouraged. I was fueled by the desire to create great pasta. 2 years of trial and error later, I finally managed to create a dish that I thought was as delicious as what I used to eat at my former part-time job. This effort paid off gradually, and by the 5th year, my restaurant finally began to stabilize financially. Yet, this hard work was shattered by the changing times. Recently, the prices of almost all food items, including wheat and eggs, have risen. Alongside, consumers' wages didn't increase. They tightened their spending further. It was around this time that cheap chain restaurants and fast foods began gaining popularity. Moreover, the number of people eating out drastically decreased, with more opting to cook at home instead. Families that used to go out for a meal on weekends now preferred staying in. My restaurant was focusing on quality domestic wheat, onions, and meat. It suffered as everyone tightened their purse strings, leading to an inevitable decline in patronage. Without coming up with specific solutions, such as increasing advertising, my store's management rapidly became unsustainable. Determined to do what I could, I desperately distributed flyers and called out for customers on my days off, but the number of customers did not increase as I had hoped, and the debt continued to grow day by day, leaving me in despair. The current economic climate was undoubtedly challenging. Yet, there must be money somewhere. If only I could reach those who can afford it, but how? Simple strategies weren't enough to increase patronage, leaving me wondering how to restore sales. I pondered various ideas, but eventually, the debt reached a critical point, and continuing to incur losses was no longer viable. I decided to close the restaurant I had run for 6 years. It was supposed to have been inherited from the restaurant owners after years of hardship. The taste of delicious pasta and sauce loved by everyone in the local community. Now, I heard the original restaurant wasn't serving as many customers due to the owner's health issues. Perhaps, after closing my restaurant, I might ask for a part-time job there again. But first, what should I do about the debt? Without significant earnings, bankruptcy seemed like the only option. I never anticipated ending up like this. My indecision and attachment were to blame. Now, I felt like I couldn't face the owner and proprietress. While serving the few remaining customers, my restaurant's final day of operation arrived all too quickly. Thank you. The orange light of dusk spilled through the gaps in the glass doors, filling the restaurant. Just like in my old part-time job, the evening baseball game played on the TV setup inside the restaurant. So this is the end for this restaurant. Back then, I fell in love with the taste of the restaurant owner's cooking and the proprietress's hospitality, convinced that this was the only job for me. Unlike my student days, where studying was my only concern, every aspect of this job came with its own set of responsibilities. Without doing anything, just living day by day wasn't enough to make a living. Yet, it felt rewarding to improve myself and receive appreciation from customers. It was delicious, thank you. I was glad I started this job just to hear those words. But the timing was poor, and I failed to adapt my business to match it. Perhaps there were better locations if one looked hard enough. In the end, I was just an amateur who learned to make noodles. Foolishly, I thought I could run a restaurant, and inevitably failing. There were times when things went well, so I couldn't bring myself to quit immediately when the business started to lose money. Man, what should I do after closing the restaurant? For now, I guess I'll have to register with a temp agency to make some money. With these thoughts cluttering my mind, I proceeded with the final closing tasks. I polished the tools I had used until they shined, filling each action with gratitude. This table where I've kneaded noodles countless times. The stove, the pots, and the restaurant's curtains. I deeply thanked all the tools that had supported me as I took down the restaurant's sign. Just then, a luxury car I'd never seen before pulled up in front of the restaurant with a roar. Though it was already past closing time, it was the last day, so I thought, why not? As I waited for the occupants to emerge, 2 men in expensive-looking suits stepped out, tall and slender, with handsome features that likely appealed to women. I felt pleased that such high-class individuals had chosen my restaurant. As they approached with the sound of their costly leather shoes, one of them, wearing a black suit, said, "It's been a while. You used to work at a different Italian restaurant about 10 years ago, right?" "Huh? Who are these people?" "Too young to be customers from my part-time job." I suddenly remembered those brothers. With a start, I looked at their faces again. Though they had matured significantly, there seemed to be a faint trace of their younger selves. Could it be Nick and Sean? They smiled happily and said, "Yes, that's us. We've caused you trouble 10 years ago. We never showed ourselves again, and we're sorry." After that day, our teacher saw our condition and suggested we be better off in a facility. We didn't live in that apartment. That's why I never found them, no matter how much I looked. More than having my questions answered, I was relieved to know they had been somewhere safe, able to lead proper lives. So that's what happened. I've been worried about whether you were cold or hungry ever since. But you were able to live properly after going to the facility, right? They nodded with a smile. Then, Nick, with tears in his eyes, said, "Even though we were strangers, you worried about us even after we parted. We can't thank you enough." Sean added, "I'm glad we came here today." Confused, I asked what he meant. Sean explained, "We've always wanted to repay you. But first, we needed to make money. Since high school, we've been trying to find profitable ventures together. After all, you get kicked out of the facility after graduating high school. We chose not to go into debt for college. At first, we wanted to help local eateries once we had a successful business. Now, we're running an online site to spread delicious local delicacies nationwide. We want to sell your pasta noodles on our site." I was astonished. Those boys, once trembling in the park, had grown so impressively, more mature than many aimless youths. They had found a way to live on their own. They had gone to great lengths to find out I was running an Italian restaurant. When they saw my restaurant struggling, they wanted to help make it thrive again by launching a new venture. Seeing their site, I realized it was the popular gourmet food ordering service featured in recent news. If we could sell a lot there, I might not be able to keep the restaurant, but I could continue selling my noodles. With that in mind, placing my last hope in them, I decided to entrust my noodles to the two of them. Several months later, amidst attractive offerings like premium fruits and delicious meat dishes, it seemed unlikely that anyone would specifically choose to buy pasta noodles, and sales were almost non-existent. However, once a user who had tried our noodles shared their rave reviews on the site and social media, word of mouth gradually spread, and our pasta noodles explosively became a hit product. This achievement wasn't solely due to the deliciousness of my noodles. It was the result of Nick and Sean's relentless efforts in studying business management and figuring out how to capture consumers' attention. As a result of continuously testing to see if the number of users on their created site would increase, their ability to achieve success was because the site they developed had become fairly well known. They then directed all the revenue to me. I insisted on paying them a portion multiple times, but Sean argued that if it weren't for us, they couldn't imagine where they'd be now. They were incredibly hungry that day and escaped to the outside because the atmosphere at home was too suffocating. Yet it was unbearably cold outside. It was us, they said, who saved their lives. Without us, they wouldn't be where they are today. So they wanted all the revenue to help me. Honestly, I was drowning in debt, so their offer was a godsend. Despite their tough circumstances, they grew into commendable individuals. Now, it was my turn to be grateful to them for their help. Thanks to the explosive sales, I was able to quickly repay my debts. I no longer consider running a physical store. In today's era, running a physical store is an incredibly challenging feat. I've decided not to maintain a storefront and instead focus on mail-order sales to avoid any losses. Complaining about the times isn't enough. Like them, I learned the importance of adapting to the market and creating a system that sells well. And if advertising strategies are executed well, they can indeed yield significant results. Their hard work taught me valuable lessons. I hope to repay them with the finest pasta I can make.